So let me just say that if America is an idea, it is the idea that human beings can come together and commit themselves to a set of universal principles, strive to achieve them, and make it some of the way there. This election and this inauguration reaffirms our faith in ourselves, in our country, and in the ability of all human beings to do things that people say can never be done. It's a great pleasure to share the inauguration with all of you, and because this is the Woodrow Wilson School, we couldn't ever have an event without commentary and analysis, and we have the pleasure of having very distinguished commentators and analyzers. So it's my pleasure now to turn over the podium to Professor Nolan McCarty, the Associate Dean on leave and the eminent scholar of American politics, who will introduce the rest of the panel. Thanks.
I thought she was going to be brief due to my eloquence. In less than 1 hour, Barack Hussein Obama will be inaugurated as the 44th President of the United States. But to call this moment historic is the worst kind of understatement. After all, in 220 years under our Constitution, we have held only 65 inaugurations for 42 different men. Each of these men, in their own ways, under different circumstances, changed the destiny of our nation, both for good and for ill. So any inauguration is a historical moment. But in historical terms, this inauguration does indeed transcend almost all others. First, the ascension of Barack Obama is a powerful symbol of opportunity and racial progress, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. That a member of a formerly oppressed racial minority obtained the chief executive office in a democratic election is not only a first in our history, but is world historical. Of course, it does not mean the end of the American dilemma, but is one of the great milestones of our progress. But this inauguration is also among the most important for much more somber reasons. For Barack Obama will inherit the leadership of a government and nation that is engaged in 2 wars, requires great vigilance about terrorism and security, is entering what is perhaps the worst economic recession in decades, faces a near collapse of its financial system, and has witnessed many citizens struggle to keep their homes in the face of a collapsing real estate market. Moreover, the country faces short and long-term problems in the areas of Social Security, education, Medicare, health costs and coverage, interdependence, and climate change. And as pressing as these issues are, President Obama will not have the luxury of turning inward. As world leader, he faces a tenuous ceasefire in another war, after another war in the Middle East, and a very imminent threat of nuclear expansion. But of course, other presidents have faced grave challenges as well. President Washington governed an infant nation under a new constitution that easily could have failed due to foreign intervention or internal squabbling. President Lincoln took the mantle of a country on the brink of civil war and preserved the Union by fighting a war and winning it. And of course, Franklin Roosevelt inherited the worst economy in American history and was ultimately drawn into the cauldron of World War. Each of these presidencies offers insight and wisdom from which President Obama may draw. Lessons about hard choices, lessons about sacrifice, lessons about the intertwining of principle and politics. But the most important lessons may be the humbling ones, the lessons that problems of such magnitude do not magically disappear in a year or 2 or 3, and that the lesson that success is not preordained. After all, for every Lincoln, there was a Buchanan. For every Roosevelt, there was a Hoover. Otherwise decent and capable men who faced similar circumstances and yet failed to resolve the crises that the nation faced. So given this backdrop, today is a day of historic hope. Regardless of the principles, partisanship, and ideologies that divide us as Americans, it is a day in which we Americans place our trust in a new president and pray that he may embark on a historical presidency of both progress and renewal. To further elaborate on these opportunities and challenges of the Obama presidency, we have 2 distinguished panelists who will share their views of this historical moment. First, we have on my right Brandice Canes-Wrone from the Princeton class of 1993, who is professor of politics and public affairs at the Woodrow Wilson School. Her fields especially include presidential, legislative, and bureaucratic politics, as well as the study of elections. She is the author of numerous articles in the leading journals of political science and the book, Who Leads Whom? Presidents, Policymaking, and the Mass Public, which was named the winner of the 2007 Richard Neustadt Award as the best book on the United States presidency. Currently, she serves on several editorial boards in the leading journals in the discipline. She earned her doctorate at Stanford University in 1998 and returned as a member of the faculty in 2004. Following Professor Canes-Wrone will be Jim Leach from the Princeton class of 1964. A former Republican congressman from Iowa, he is the John L. Weinberg Goldman Sachs Company Visiting Professor of Public and International Affairs. He served 30 years as a representative in Congress, where he chaired the Banking and Financial Services Committee, the Subcommittee on Asian and Pacific Affairs, and the Congressional Executive Commission on China. He holds 8 honorary degrees, has received decorations from 2 foreign governments, and is the recipient of the Wayne Morse Integrity in Politics Award, the Woodrow Wilson Award from Johns Hopkins, the Adlai Stevens Award from the United Nations, and the Edgar Wayburn Award from the Sierra Club. Leach is a member of the Council of Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commissions, and formerly served as a trustee of Princeton University. I turn it now over to Professor Canes-Wrone.
So most days we see our job as scholars to point out the problems with our country and hopefully to offer some constructive solutions. In recent months, there have been some easy pickings, at least in terms of naming the problems. We face, as has already been mentioned, a dire economic situation. To point to just one statistic, over the past year, there's been a 50% increase in the number of children whose families qualify for food stamps, and that's not one of these statistics that's due to the government changing its food stamps criteria. Our country is suffering from, among other things, the effect of a housing market that was built on a house of cards, with questionable behavior by private financial institutions, as well as government-sponsored enterprises, home lenders, home buyers, and a host of others. The recurring broadcasts of terrorist groups remind us that there are people interested in harming Americans and who do not respect our way of life. Well, I could go on and on about these challenges. Today is not the day to do so. It's a day for celebration. Celebration about a peaceful transfer of power, and, of course, most especially, the inauguration of our first Black president. This past holiday season, I had numerous occasions to think about some of the scars of our nation's past and how phenomenal Obama's presidency is within the context of these scars. On New Year's Day, I visited the Navajo Pueblo in New Mexico, where deep poverty is manifest, and where the tribe performed their traditional turtle dance, which they've performed since before the European settlers first came to this country. I then read Toni Morrison's new novel, Mercy, which, if you haven't read it, poignantly describes the tribulations that Native Americans, as well as African Americans, went through during the early days of our nation, in fact, in colonial times. These scars will always be with us. Nowadays, you can go to a dermatologist and they have these really powerful lasers that can take off almost any type of scar. But these are the sorts of deep scars that will always be with our nation. At the same time, they can happily be placed alongside enormous transformations that have occurred. Even just since the 1930s, when mass modern public opinion surveys became available, and which started, by the way, here in Princeton, our nation has experienced a transformation of public opinion about blacks and other minorities, as well as about women. Back in 1937, there was, in fact, a survey conducted by Gallup on the willingness of American citizens to vote for various demographic groups for president. At that point, 46% of the public expressed a willingness to vote for a Jewish president. 60% expressed a willingness to vote for a Catholic president, and only 33% expressed a willingness to vote for women. The question was not even asked about blacks at that time, because that must have seemed like such a remote possibility. In 1967, 53% of the public expressed a willingness to vote for blacks. 57% a willingness to vote for women, and 82% a willingness to vote for Jews. In 2007, over 90% of the public expressed a willingness to vote for a Catholic, Black, or Jew. Almost 90% a willingness to vote for a woman. Other groups did not perform quite as well, I should note. Atheists, only 44% are willing to vote for. Mormons have also, if anything, gone down since the 1960s. Homosexuals aren't doing so well. And actually, it should be noted that those 72 years and older, also, and this was back in 2007, so before McCain was the nominee, only 50% expressed a willingness to vote for someone 72 years old or older. Yeah. It should also be noted that political scientists have developed fairly sophisticated techniques to see whether these responses are about social desirability or simply, or in fact, true preferences. And I'd love to describe those techniques in detail, but I won't do that today. These sorts of experiments, as well as other types of tests, tend to support this claim that there has been real progress in terms of public opinion about blacks, women, and many other minority groups. Nor are these public opinion findings in isolation of events in the political and other spheres. Since 1970, the number of black elected officials in our country has increased more than sixfold, from fewer than 1,500 to more than 9,000. Economist Claudia Golden, in studying women's progress in the workforce, has recently and eloquently pointed out that for women, there has been a quiet revolution in the workforce, with women now entering professional schools at about the same rate that men do, and with the female wage gap decreasing since 1980 from 60 cents on the dollar to about 75 cents on the dollar. These sorts of changes in public opinion and real observable outcomes for groups that were not treated equally at our nation's birth and indeed were considered the property of others begs the question, what features of American life have enabled these massive changes? Is it mostly luck or the actions of a few great men and women? Certainly, we owe a great debt to the men and women who have risen to the challenges of their times and become the major figures of our history, such as Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and Susan B. Anthony. At the same time, it seems worth highlighting that there are certain features of our culture, and indeed, even our heritage, that have propelled many men and women to become heroes and foot soldiers, whether sung or unsung. What are some of these features? For one, our legacy as a nation of immigrants has meant that we are a nation looking forward rather than to past grievances. At the same time, we have been willing to admit our errors and, however imperfectly, try to make some attempts to right them. Our associated freedom of speech and the separation of church and state have built upon our natural diversity of backgrounds to facilitate not just a melting pot, but a tolerance that is the envy of much of the world. It's worth noting that even in the nadir of public opinion around the world of the United States, during parts of this recent Bush administration, public opinion surveys have consistently found that citizens around the world recognize that when their own citizens emigrate to the United States, they tend to better their lives by coming here. Just to reemphasize within the context of a specific example, in Morocco, where only 15% of citizens held a favorable view of the United States in 2007, the very same survey suggests that the majority of Moroccans believe that immigrants from their country to the United States bettered their lives by coming here, and almost no Moroccans responded that citizens had worsened their lives by coming here. More generally, it's a standard finding that the United States, however disliked for a particular policy, a particular president, or at a particular point in time, is seen as a place that people can come and better their lives. I would argue that it is this world of opportunity that drives so many Americans to serve their country, whether it be as community organizers, public defenders, CIA agents, military officers, or elected officials. Barack Obama's inauguration helps remind us of the world of opportunity in America. He reminds us through his own impressive and meteoric rise in politics and his ability to inspire so many different types of people. We also get to know his beautiful wife, Michelle, who came from an African-American family of modest financial means, went on to attend Princeton and Harvard Law, and then to make for herself a highly successful career in her own right. We begin Obama's presidency with a sense of change, but also, and perhaps more importantly, with a sense that our nation continues to make real progress in terms of offering equal opportunity for all of our citizens. Real progress, of course, does not mean that there are no challenges ahead. However, the progress that Obama both embodies and will hopefully propel further is something that all Americans, whether Republican, Independent, or Democrat, can applaud. Thank you.
Well, inaugurals are generally somber events. This one's uplifting. In fact, it may even be heroic. As everybody here knows, our founders affirmed all men are created equal and that we had self-evident and inalienable rights. It's taken more than 2 centuries of struggle, which included a civil war, a civil rights movement, now the election of the 44th president, to make self-evident the American political creed. And what seemed radical political philosophy in the 18th century remained in the 19th and 20th radical sociology in the United States. And now we're looking at the notion that the creed that we established, which was the most revolutionary in human history and remains so, is now finally self-evident. The political ethic that Barack Obama signifies is a break with today's politics, but it's part and parcel of a progressive continuum in our history. There's a tendency to try to bring historical judgments to administrations without the benefit of historical perspective and to predict outcomes for administrations before a new president has had a chance to put an imprint on his office. It's been suggested, for instance, that the Bush administration has been a failure. Well, this may be a conjectural conclusion of many citizens today and perhaps confirmed by historians generations hence. What can be noted with certainty is that the Bush presidency has been, in very important ways, an aberration. The engine of the state has been ideologically derailed by the classic sins, hubris and greed compounded by ambition, and the incoming administration is determined to get America back on track. In a political context, this inauguration is about change, not simply a shift in political party leadership, which is a norm for America, but a shift in direction, which is not. For the first time in our history, there is a sense that we have erred. The right prescriptions have not been applied to our economy, and the right proscriptions have not been advanced in our foreign policy. Seldom, as has been noted, perhaps since Lincoln, has a president been presented upon taking office with a portfolio of more daunting challenges. On the economic front, the recession is deepening. Experiments with leaving many behind, giving in to the big and powerful with no room for advancement of the middle class will come to an end. In foreign policy, our philosophical moorings are in question. The notion that the United States, which has stood so long for the advancement of law, should decree as a doctrine that we are above the law and have the right preemptively to invade a country that neither attacked us nor stood as an imminent threat, invites others to assume similar strategic postures and most profoundly undercuts our traditional values. The new course the President-elect has chartered is shaped by contemporary circumstances, but it's rooted very much in historic American ideals. His call is for renewed fairness, a commitment to law, and an underpinning respect for all peoples of the planet. The inaugural address we're about to hear will be more about values and programs, the future rather than the past, except where expressions of change are symbolically imperative, as in dealing with entitlements, which, by the way, is the new issue of the month, closing Guantanamo, and winding down a war. The winds of change are blowing across the country, but our new president can be expected to note what is hopeful and beckoning in our history. Despite our missteps, we're likely to be reminded of how fortunate we are to be able to build in the service and sacrifice of those who came before. In this context, Barack Obama may well use the bulliest pulpit of his presidency, this inaugural, to announce his intention to give highest priority to mediating between Palestinians and Israelis. His theme will be justice, his methodology, diplomatic engagement with peoples and countries with whom we differ, from Iran to North Korea to Cuba. Shunning is ideological posturing, realism demands engagement. As a senator, Barack Obama began his campaign as a candidate focused on changing a policy about war. As president-elect for less than an hour more, he's ending a transition focused on the economy. Problems shift and interrelate. The effects, for instance, of aggressive interventionism impinge on our ability to manage our affairs at home as well as lead abroad. In material terms, the cost of war has been high and life and limbs incalculable, and loss of goodwill built up over a century by the sacrifices of our fathers and grandfathers, disheartening, and in the increase in animus about America and our political stewardship, tragic. What ties together the various themes Barack Obama has set forth in his quest for the presidency is a desire to reach out to the unempowered, to the underdog at home and abroad, to people crying out for respect. It is their hopes and aspirations that must be listened to and addressed if there's any chance of uniting America and diminishing conflict in the world. For good reason, the American people voted last November for a new generation of leadership. Now, on this remarkable day of transition, the American melting pot is bubbling with new ideas and renewed energy. And with a confident sense of self and of American history, Barack Obama comes to the highest office in the land. We all have a vested interest in helping ensure that this administration succeeds. We cannot allow it to fail. Thank you.